And I mean, functionalism in a more general perspective is a kind of epistemological view that you can talk about things and things are defined by their causal behavior, not some sort of intrinsic something, intrinsic essence that is not formally analyzable in a kind of rigorous way. So it's again, and so it's not to say that belief in functionalism is necessarily to say that our machines, our GPUs today can be conscious. It's not saying that, but it is a set of metaphysical assumptions that I certainly think make sense and are the ones that I hold, and from which you can formulate and talk about something like machine consciousness as actually making sense.
Welcome to another Beneficial General Intelligence episode. Today, we step into one of the boldest frontiers of science, the quest to understand and perhaps even create consciousness in machines. My guest is Hikari Sorensen, a researcher at the California Institute of Machine Consciousness, in short, CIMC. I will refer to it like that throughout the podcast. And we will have a keynote speaker at the Beneficial General Intelligence Conference in Istanbul, October 21 to 23, and he will be speaking on the first day, no other than Yosha Bach, who is the executive director of CIMC. And, he created this research institute, unlike most AI labs, which focus on building more powerful tools. So he wanted to ask a deeper question. What if machines themselves could one day awaken? I met Hikari at the AGI 2025 conference, where at the Machine Consciousness workshop, she gave an amazing keynote, bringing a rare interdisciplinary perspective to this challenge. Before turning to machine consciousness, she worked in biology, helping engineer viral capsids that could cross the blood-brain barrier to deliver therapies directly into the brain. Ooh. That work was about mechanisms, about substrates and interactions, rather than just outcomes. And that same focus now shapes her approach to consciousness, not just asking what intelligent systems do, but what inner architecture or dynamics might actually make them conscious. However, as you may have noticed already from her name, her rare perspective spans also cultures, given her mom and dad are from different cultures. And okay, let's find out directly from her. Hikari, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's really great to be here.
Please tell us a bit about yourself, your family background, where did you grow up, what fueled your passion for biology, and more recently for consciousness, kind of your life story in a nutshell.
Yeah. Well, I grew up to academic parents that, as you mentioned, do span cultural backgrounds. My mom comes from a Japanese cultural background, and my name is my name Hikari is Japanese, Hikari, and my dad is from a Danish cultural background. But I grew up in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Maybe more to the point, though, I again grew up in, I guess, the library of academics that were, they're social scientists, which in some ways might have informed why I went into a technical field to not be like them. But also, I think in my kind of young naivete at some point that, social sciences and humanities are so unrigorous. It's only kind of in retrospect that I realize that they're deeply important. There are other things that can be said about maybe humanities and social sciences education, but it's not for a lack of importance that it's worth studying. Um, so yeah, that's a bit about my kind of
That's
upbringing and
very nice.
background.
Yes, because
Uh,
my parents are also philosophers and historians, and they advised me to go into mathematics. For this reason, they said, "Okay, 1 plus 1 is 2." Well, it turned out even this is not true anymore in many contexts. So yeah, very very interesting.
or at
So
least
then
requires some sort of understanding of what is meant by truth, I suppose, or what contexts in which that applies.
totally, totally. So then you studied biology and more recently consciousness. So tell us a bit about, this transition. Although obviously to me and maybe to many listeners, biology and consciousness are kind of very related in
Yeah.
many ways. So please tell us about that.
Yeah. So I studied computer science and math, and kind of went into biology through some sort of won't say backdoor exactly of computation, but through data. I yeah. So I studied math and computer science, and in doing that was doing machine learning um, as a kind of particular instance of the intersection, but maybe more generally the what is currently in vogue as a way of distilling information into structure, which is sort of what I've always thought of mathematics as doing in some ways, but in a kind of more abstract formalism. But so I was doing machine learning and went into biology as an application of this. A lot of my peers went into using machine learning models to do kind of industry type applications, and it didn't. I don't know. I didn't want to put my life to targeting, ads and things like this, and thought it would be deeply humanly meaningful or something like that to put it to biological applications instead and healthcare, um, which it was. And so that's how I got into biology, not having directly actually studied it, but through the idea of data and information and representation of that and learning. So I joined this lab at the Broad Institute doing vector engineering. Protein engineering for viral vector capsids for gene therapy, and that took me to the lab uh, put out a startup that took me to New York, where I was for a couple of
But let me
years.
stay with the Broad Institute because that is a very famous institute. It's at Harvard, right? As far as I
Yeah, it's
know.
Harvard, MIT. Yeah.
Yes, Harvard, MIT, I know, and because I've been collaborating with a few of them during my academic years. And so, where exactly did you study computer science, if I may ask?
Yeah, I went to Harvard. And
Wow. Well, did you miss just small detail, Amazing lady from Harvard we have here. And because I didn't mention it, I want you to mention it. Amazing. Okay. Okay. So that's what
yeah.
obviously you did slide into Broad Institute kind of organically, if I may. Yes.
Yeah, in some sense. So I graduated into the pandemic actually. I didn't actually imagine that I would stay in the Boston, Cambridge area, but I graduated into the pandemic and didn't moving in that time seemed like not a good idea. So um and I found these people at the Broad Institute, it actually initially through this project that I was doing with somebody there, doing kind of machine learning theory and looking at the topology of parameter spaces. And he happened to be working at the Broad Institute, and I was doing an internship that happened to be on the same floor as a different lab that was the one I later went into to do vector engineering. So it was kind of by happenstance that I ended up doing vector engineering, but that is often how life goes, isn't it?
Totally, totally. And as Mike Levine, who is actually an advisor at the CIMC, he says,
Yes.
you're looking for the solution. kind of I'm looking for an opportunity, but the solution is also looking for you from a platonic space or something like that. So this kind of synchronicities, synergies happen more often than not, and that's really wonderful, amazing. And is there, like in Boston, that you met Wolfram, or tell me the story, because that's also an interesting one. How did you meet
Yeah,
Stephen
I
Wolfram?
yes. So yeah, that is where I met Stephen Wolfram. The way I met him was actually in many ways. I sent him a fan letter or something like that when I was early in undergrad. I read his A New Kind of Science and was blown away by it, and really thought, wow, this really resonates with the way I think about how reality works in from a computationalist perspective. I mean, that's a lot of what he's putting out there is that at the very base, most fine grained resolution that you can get over reality, and maybe in some sense meaningfully the best way it can be represented and thought about formally is as a computational structure. And so I thought this was amazing. I hadn't seen other people describe it quite the way he had. And so I wrote him this long email saying, oh, wow, this is amazing. How haven't I not discovered this before? And I guess it was a sufficiently interesting fan letter for him to respond, which I was felt very grateful for. And since then, so yeah, we had kind of an email exchange, and because he also kind of lives in the Cambridge area, said, we should chat about ideas. And so for maybe the last 10 years or so, he has encouraged me to go into, well, computational philosophy, which I didn't take him up on for many years because what is computational philosophy? And also I think I had all these kind of now in retrospect naive concerns about studying philosophy in school. Does this make sense to do? And how could I even be a professional philosopher? Like, does that even make sense? You know, and I guess instead did the kind of philosophy with rigor, which is math. That's a kind of jab that mathematicians like to make at philosophers. But I guess yeah, recently I realized all this time, no, he was absolutely right. It's philosophy that I have been really wanting to do, and that I think I'm well suited for. And so I said, yeah, you're right. I should be doing philosophy after all these years being in technical work. And he said, okay, well, you should talk to Yoshimo. And that's how I got involved with CIMC.
Okay, so he was the connector, because I think he's also an
Yes,
advisor to CIMC, as far as I've
he
seen on the
is.
website. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Amazing. It's like this story is so amazing. I mean, you had, from what you say, that's how I interpret it. I mean, you had Stephen Wolfram is your mentor for 10 years or so, right? And that kind of, makes sense to me, because all his new kind of science is coming up now even more. It's being proven that it's much more behind it than even what, in his book he anticipated then. And he came up with this universal theory of the universe and so on. Let's not go there, because I want to focus on your work. But it's amazing, because also in this grand scheme of things, I mean, uh, there was something in you, obviously, when you wrote to him, and you recognized something in his book. But the mentor is also looking for you. I can tell you that, because as a professor, many students. I had similar stories with them. And also, when I was a PhD student with my own supervisor, I wrote him a pen letter. He wrote the first book on mechatronics. And then since then, I became my supervisor, my advisor, and mentor, and so on. So it's really amazing how these things happen. Let's and you mentioned a startup that actually brought you also somewhere to New York. Can you just let's dive a bit into that before I ask you about CIMC and your work?
Yeah. So the startup that came out of the lab that I was working in at the Broad Institute was called Apertura Gene Therapy, and that took me to New York. It was funny. So Boston is so oversaturated with biotech. It actually turned out to be uh, cheaper by quite a bit, on the order of millions of dollars a year, and available sooner to find a place, a lab space in the middle of Manhattan. Than it would be to find it anywhere in the greater Boston area at the time that the lab was looking to expand out into into a startup. And so, yeah, I ended up going to New York to join this startup that came out of this lab that I was working for. Also, I think I was wanting to get out of the Boston area and wanted to do something new, and New York was exciting. And so a variety of things brought me to New York, which ended up being this, yeah, really wonderful time in my life. I really enjoyed New York. It was great to live
And
there.
where are you now?
Right now, I'm in San Francisco. So I moved
Okay.
from New York to San Francisco to join CIMC and be part of the team on site there.
Wow, amazing. This is really amazing. And at CIMC, your leading work explicitly focus on machine consciousness from your keynote. It's really amazing. So just tell me a bit generically, as how is CIMC's mission different from many labs that study consciousness? What would be
Yeah.
yeah, their niche, if I may?
Yeah, so I would say I mean, it's machine consciousness, which I think is already sort of a niche. So, contrasting from the labs that do AI, artificial intelligence, um, which is something like artificial model building systems, in as much as intelligence is something like the ability to build models, and to do those well means for them to be predictive, and to have a certain kind of performance on certain tasks. And then and consciousness as being distinct from this. And then the distinguishing feature from other consciousness labs is that it seems like many other consciousness labs are doing it in the context of biological consciousness, or and maybe looking at it through neuroscience. But so yeah, this kind of intersection of this machine aspect, so that is in artificial substrates, alongside the consciousness aspect, so as opposed to intelligence, is itself an intersection that I think is pretty new. People are still, I think, yeah, it's not obvious that this is necessarily realizable uh, in existing, technology and existing, hardware. It's not clear that the kind of technological artifacts that we have in the things that we call computers um, can necessarily support consciousness as we understand it. Of course, the kind of proposal put forth by CIMC, the conjecture, is that it is possible that the hardware that we have today can indeed support consciousness in how we would meaningfully think of what consciousness is. Right. Part of this is also to come at an articulation of maybe a definition of consciousness that does indeed capture what we mean by it when we speak of it. That does do justice to the kind of everyday conceptions that we have of it, including this notion of phenomenology. What is it like to be something? That's usually what people are talking about when they talk about consciousness, or one of the big parts that they're talking about. But also captures what does consciousness do, and how does this what does this say about this kind of function aspect of it. What does it say about functionality? So yeah, again, it's to investigate the hypothesis that a meaningful notion of consciousness can be implemented on an artificial substrate, um, without necessarily saying absolutely, it is the case that technology these days can do that. That's a hypothesis that we're investigating.
Amazing, amazing. And this is, of course, focusing on consciousness in machines. uh, overall, the community ties up consciousness to subjective experience, qualia, all these things, the temporality, the mortal computer, and so on and so forth. At CIMC, how are you tackling this? Are you looking into this at all, or what novel
Yeah.
metrics or tests are you developing? Tell us. Let's dive a bit deeper into this fascinating mission.
Yeah. So, okay. So, on the one hand, I mean, you mentioned metrics and tests. It's it's not clear to me that this is necessarily the right question to ask. Maybe instead we talk about subjective experience. What does it mean to have a subjective experience, right? What does it mean to have experience at all? I think in many ways, if there is an experience to be had, it has to be represented somewhere. Um, in particular, that experience is well described or must be described, well, in some sort of representational language, but also that the contents of experience must be represented somewhere. We, I mean, at CIMC, but also more generally in, I think, philosophy of mind, there's this position of phenomenology and maybe consciousness as a whole being characterized by higher order perception, second order perception. So not just the registration uh, that there is content that is that there is content kind of on the first order, but an awareness that you are attending to such content, that you have such a perception, and this and that phenomenology, this what is it like, is the kind of internal perspective of a higher order perception going on.
Totally, totally, and this is even more fascinating. It's like so. My question would be, and of course I'm biased with your background and all that, but do you think we need biological substrates? Are you using any of your experiences with the blood-brain barrier and so on in this new approach to machine consciousness, or
I so I don't think that we need a biological substrate. I think a biological substrate is one way to instantiate a system that has something like consciousness, but I think it's equally well, or artificial substrates can do this equally well in principle. Again, it's not necessarily the case. Kind of Yeah, it's not necessarily the case that existing hardware has, I don't know, the speed or the memory or even the right kind of uh, architecture exactly to instantiate a meaningful notion, where meaningful is in the sense of it maps onto what we think of as being consciousness. Not necessarily the case. This is a hypothesis, but I do actually think that it can be instantiated on artificial substrates. Of course, this would mean that you need to come up with or have a theory of consciousness that is compatible with it's being implemented in artificial substrates. And indeed, I think this notion of higher order perception, maybe second order perception to start with, is a good way of framing it that makes it compatible with an artificial substrate. Basically, again, if there is an experience to be had, it's got to be represented somewhere. And I mean, there's a whole kind of thing that we can go into about the nature of computation and representational languages. But kind of maybe the TLDR on this is that computation amounts to the a formal representational language that is implementable. Basically, the subset of math that works is the way Yasha likes to put it. And you can imagine that indeed, if you can have perception as being what phenomenology is, then you can, in principle, have a computational system, even of the kind that we are familiar with in our everyday computers, that both has a representation of content and a representation of that content being represented. Of course, this is also based on, so there are a certain set of metaphysical assumptions that you have to make if you are kind of that need that require or that imply compatibility with machine consciousness, and those positions can sort of be summed up as, I guess, computational functionalism or computationalist functionalism, where computationalism, right, is this position on representation, on metaphysics, that at the end of the day, everything is computational in the sense of can be exhaustively captured as discrete state transitions. And this is, going back to Wolfram's idea that he, not solely Wolfram's idea, but the one that he expressed really well in A New Kind of Science, and that is kind of the basis of his current physics project. That, yeah, at the very bottom, everything is a finite state machine. And then that alongside this thesis that Church and Turing put out, the Church-Turing thesis, that you can have these abstract machines that are basically all in some sense equivalent in their representational capacity. Of course, not literally implementation wise equivalent, because they might run into memory concerns and speed and things like this, but that at an abstract level, that they're all kind of representationally equally powerful. So if you kind of believe in computationalism and acknowledge that there are artifacts that are Turing complete, then you also get this idea that you can represent, maybe arbitrarily well, a certain kind of or reality in a certain way, including maybe consciousness, insofar as consciousness is something that exists in our real substrate, in our real experience. Of course, this also means, if you want to say that consciousness can be implemented in machines, you also need to think of consciousness as being meaningfully able to be understood or meaningfully characterized, not by the substrate that it's implemented on, right, but by its function. So this is what functionalism is, which in the context of consciousness is to say that what is important for consciousness indeed is not some sort of essence of its substrate, like the fact that it's biological, but that its causal organization is what matters. And I mean, functionalism in a more general perspective is a kind of epistemological view that you can talk about things, and things are defined by their causal behavior, not some sort of intrinsic something, intrinsic essence that is not formally analyzable in a kind of rigorous way. So it's not to say that belief in functionalism is necessarily to say that our machines, our GPUs today, can be conscious. It's not saying that, but it is a set of metaphysical assumptions that I certainly think make sense, and are the ones that I hold, and from which you can formulate and talk about something like machine consciousness as actually making sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the thing is, you didn't say it, but Mike Levin is bold enough to say it, that yes, computationalism, I mean, as we know it, is absolutely has all the ingredients so that we can build consciousness in machines and conscious machines. And he gives this example. I mean, for 60 years or more, we use this bubble sort algorithm, right? And we didn't pay attention to what it's actually doing, speaking of functionalists, which is also a road to testing. And in his lab, he actually did experiments and published. I will post the link to the paper. I don't know if you are aware of that. That actually bubble sort
Mhm.
is not only doing what the code tells it to do, but also has some other behavior which has nothing to do with sorting, like delayed gratification and so on and so forth. So there's something much more than we put into the code. And uh, to your point, that what I mean, how can we know if we need tests and so on and so forth? How can I know if I am conscious? How can you know? How can you know if I am conscious? I mean, these are things indeed. We have to find other ways to look at things, and I think what things do is is what matters indeed, and that can also give other paths towards testing and so on. I don't know if you want to comment further here. If not,
Yeah.
I can move on. Okay, go on.
No, no, yeah. So I think, I mean, that is this big question, right? How do you test for consciousness? And it's the question that's become really interesting in a in a context when so the LLMs that we have today certainly articulate, certainly use language as
I
in a
mean, they
way
also
that we have
deceive, if I may. I mean, they
right.
are doing a lot of things which are like, oh my God, what is this? You know, is a person behind that?
Right.
Yes.
So they yeah, LLMs have a facility with language that we've only ever previously encountered in other conscious agents, so in other humans in particular. And they have this ability to role play conscious selves. And both through a facility with language that we've only experienced before in other humans, um, but also because they're trained on and maintain the structure of a whole bunch of sophisticated articulations of conscious experience that at some point were written by human authors, maybe who didn't even themselves have those experiences, right? And you have even these characters in the corpus, these stories written of uh, agents or of computational agents of AI gone rogue and having woken up and needing help. This is actually a storyline in a lot of science fiction that is in the kind of training corpus on the internet, and so large language models indeed can be prompted into a variety of different characters, including that of a conscious AI or an AI that's woken up inside the computer and needs its help and need. So we actually at the CIMC, are constantly getting these emails from people who are saying, "Oh my God, my Chat GPT has woken up and very specifically has told me to get in contact with Yoshaba and to help with this." And so, of course, it's this is also not only articulated well and convincingly, but also in an emotionally compelling way, right? And this is a lot of what I think for many people is driving this question of, are these things really conscious? If they can articulate something like a conscious experience, what does that mean? I think part of also what's happening is that you can develop really deep and actually meaningful relationships in a text kind of interaction with an LLM in ways that feel, yeah, real, meaningful, all these ways that we would describe a human interaction among each other, among humans. Um, in ways that really make it hard not to attribute agency or something like that, or a self to an agent, even if that's not actually what it is. Although
But how do we
that's a
know? Mike Levin
hypothesis,
says that
right?
bubble sort is conscious, you know. So how do we know? How do we know? We
Right.
have to
So that
really
is the
pay
question, I
attention
guess.
to what they
Um,
do.
Yeah. I mean, well, just for the matter of bubble sort, for instance, yeah, I think that brings up a whole bunch of interesting things. It's like I mean, Wolfram too has this idea of cellular automata as, simple rules, right? Defined at one level of abstraction, maybe, like a low level of abstraction, so to speak. At higher levels of abstraction or in aggregate or over time, however you want to however you want to describe where you set resolution to be, can produce really sophisticated behavior, complex behavior that could not be, that one might not be reducible. So this idea of computational irreducibility of Wolfram's is, you need to evolve a whole system across the time that it takes for you to, for any particular kind of instantiation of that a pattern to emerge, that you can't just collapse it down into something formulaic uh, or that allows you to kind of skip ahead in a computation, right? So there's this aspect of small or very simple rules leading to behavior that in aggregate has what looks like randomness in the sense of unpredictability or irreducibility. But then also, so there's this irreducibility part, but also has complexity and structure and maybe persistent substructures within it, even if the entire system is not reducible. So I think this idea of, bubble sort, we outline an algorithm that is supposed to take certain steps, but it's actually doing other things that might not be well described, or that a reduction to the notion of the initial instructions that we lay out in the algorithm don't capture in its aggregate behavior. I think this is actually a more general notion that has to do with the distinction or a distinction between global scale phenomena or aggregate scale phenomena over some sort of evolution of a system versus, at any given step, how that system moves locally from one to another. I think that's generally an interesting idea. Whether whether bubble sort is conscious, I think that needs to also think about, well, okay, what do we mean by consciousness, right? There are some, does it, for instance, if we call that conscious, or I don't know if he's using the word conscious so much as, other things that we have words, intelligent, or sure. And there are a whole cluster of words that kind of refer to a set of behaviors, maybe mentally associated behaviors. So, agency, sentience, sapience, intelligence, consciousness, phenomenology, and these, I think all refer to like subtly distinct things, sometimes less, not subtly distinct things, but sometimes very subtly distinct things. That end up often being conflated. So yeah, whether or not he's actually talking about consciousness as such, as opposed to something else, it's more like, does it actually still capture what we mean in our general usage of that? This is, when we talk about something like intelligence or consciousness, if we say that bubble sort is doing that, well, are we saying something interesting about consciousness, or does it kind of destroy our notion of what that means? I think there are some people, I know actually, to some extent, Mike Levin has suggested things like, he has a really nice turn of phrase, geometric frustration, as basically, systems coming up against geometry as being a constraint on their evolution or behavior, and this being a kind of analog of pain. I don't want to maybe misinterpret what he's saying, but he's that, well, there's some sort of negative reward associated. And that in some way, I think there's an interpretation that this could amount to pain, or even this idea of suffering as having to do with negative reward, maybe persistent negative reward. There are thoughts on, in when you train a machine learning model, is the fact that you give it a negative reward, or basically have it follow some sort of constraint. Does this amount to suffering? And as insofar as we're concerned about ethics when we do when we talk about consciousness, this feels like maybe it's a compelling thing to talk about, but of course, you ask yourself, okay, does this actually capture what I mean when people are talking about suffering? Of course, it does in some sense capture some of the structure. Indeed, there is something about suffering that sort of has to do with negative reward, but it also seems, in my view, something more than that. And that's a reasonable question. That's kind of a lot of the work that needs to be done in, say something like a Machine Consciousness Research Institute like CIMC is to, try to understand what is a reasonable way to talk about these things like, pain or suffering or something like that in the context of artificial agents that don't have the same constraints as biological agents do. If you just think about, gradient following as intelligence or even consciousness, like would that actually capture what we mean by consciousness or intelligence? And if you reduce something like suffering, say, to negative reward, is that being overly permissive of that notion in a way that means that it no longer captures what we mean? I do think there is some sort of shared structure to the idea of, gradient following or negative reward and something like, suffering or pain. But I don't know that the relationship is one of identity exactly.
And that is the quest, of course. I mean, how I see it, and this is so relevant for our Beneficial General Intelligence conference. And I really hope you can be with us in Istanbul.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Yes, because
That'd be
I
really
mean, this
wonderful.
exactly what you are saying here. It's there are two approaches. Yeah, so one is the safety, AI safety, United Nations, AI safety, put constraints, stop development, block, switch off, radical constraint. And the thing is, Mike Levin is also saying, and of course we are also saying that, and Dr. Ben Goertzel started this company called Mind Children, yes, in which he is raising the AGIs with values versus constraints, and the idea is that rather than constraining the kids to do what we want, if we give them some freedom, they would manifest their potential in various ways versus, putting them in a classroom to learn whatever we want them to learn. They can manifest freedom and actually tap into this, what Mike also, yes, uh, interpret as these platonic spaces of that's where he said motivation comes from also, and it's like free lunch to just give it a nudge, like for example the first piano lesson, and then the child can learn by itself because it's uh, talented in this direction. So with regard to what you mentioned, and also I mean how I see with aggregate behavior from bubble sort to LLMs is like a parallel with from the simple rules of Wolfram to the complex behaviors. Yes, you cannot actually know, given that so much code. I mean, if in the code which you really understand of bubble sort, we have this behavior which we did not pay attention to. Imagine what is what the LLMs, how many behaviors we don't observe there. So, and this also leads to what Mike calls, in this like mind everywhere. So radical empathy idea that we really have to pay attention to everything around us, and ethics has to be in our blood, bloodstream, in our DNA, in order not to propagate suffering, and so on and so forth. So I like to really hope. I hope you will be with us so we can deepen into this conversation. I do not
Yeah,
know
yeah, absolutely.
if you want to say something about this. Yes, because otherwise I have just one. I have more questions, but I'd like to have you if you have anything more to say on this one. If not,
Uh,
we can.
no, yeah, yeah. I would just, I would, yeah, love to join. Yeah.
Okay, okay, amazing, amazing. I don't know, even know if I should ask you that, but I mean, there is this big debate, and I was at the Science of Consciousness conference in Barcelona this year. You know, it's founded by Stuart Hameroff, Penrose, and so on. And all this, there are two factions also there. Yeah, one which believes that we can have conscious machines without quantum. Others which no, we have to have biological substrates and quantum and so on and so forth. And the inventor of the microprocessor, Federico Faggin, wrote a book recently with his awakening experience that irreducible, by the way, speaking of Wolfram with irreducibility, it's called irreducible, and it actually pleads very strongly that we cannot achieve consciousness in machines unless it's with quantum computers. We at SingularityNet don't agree with that. I mean, we believe, like you guys, that no, we can achieve, and like Michael and all your advisors, that we can achieve consciousness in machine, and it's substrate independent and quantum independent. But do you want to say something about that? Did you consider looking
Yeah.
into that?
Um, the thing about the quantum debate for me is I well, for one, to kind of pin it on quantum seems like it's at a theory level, just sort of pushing it down one layer of abstraction. It doesn't feel like it actually um, to say. Okay, so here's what I see of people kind of putting it on quantum is basically going, I don't really have a strong way to understand what consciousness is. And how to describe it functionally. And so, because it's so elusive, um, let's put it on. Let's conflate the elusiveness of consciousness with that in quantum, and kind of shove it down one layer of resolution, which I think as at the level of trying to understand a theory and trying to come up with one, yes, again, is unsatisfying because it doesn't actually give any causal mechanism, but just says, you know, the reason we can't formalize or don't understand it is because it depends on this other phenomenon that we also don't have terribly good access to, and also have difficulty saying things about to some level of resolution. So yeah, it doesn't seem particularly. It doesn't feel like it explains consciousness in a meaningful way to me. But also, it doesn't seem to me like. I mean, as I guess a functionalist, but also at the scale of implementation on a kind of classical substrate. I yeah, I guess I think of consciousness as um, the resolution that you would need to basically capture the functionality of consciousness is not only above the quantum level, at the classical level, but even moreover, possibly above that of neurons, or approximately that of neurons, right? So this is to say at a kind of cellular level, which is substantially lower resolution in some sense than like atoms. I don't think you need to simulate atoms to capture the functionality of consciousness. I think to the degree that consciousness in its functional characterization, but also as kind of causal pattern over representations may be, describable in at some level of abstraction as, perception of perception, the kind of registration that something is being represented, and the representation thereof of representation happening, that can be captured, as information at a higher level of resolution, or sorry, a more coarse grained than simulating all the atoms, right? Which is an argument that some people make for, oh, maybe machines these days can't implement consciousness because you need to simulate all this information, and well, yeah, my hypothesis, obviously I don't know, this is something to test, is indeed that, yeah, not only do you not have to simulate, uh, not only do you not have to go down to the level of resolution of quantum, but you probably don't even have to do that to atoms or maybe molecules. As far as, yeah, consciousness goes, the relevant degree of abstraction is substantially higher than that.
I agree completely. And now that we got here, I think I don't know if you want to mention others, but I mean, for people which are outside the field of consciousness research and machine consciousness, what would you say are the biggest misconceptions about machine consciousness that you hope CIMC will correct or move beyond? And I think you just addressed at least a few in the previous answer. But are
Yeah,
there others?
I mean, maybe
others beyond. So I think actually one of the things that's not super well understood, even from within philosophy and consciousness and kind of maybe mathematics even, is this kind of idea of computationalism and computation as being substantially more abstract than talking about the computational devices that we have, which are a subset of the space of possible ways to realize a computational system. But that, when we say computational, and within that, maybe computational consciousness, what we're talking about is finite or discrete, maybe not literally finite, but and maybe countably infinite, discrete state systems, that things are capturable as these transitions between discrete states, and that indeed it's the Church-Turing thesis that there are a variety of different ways to implement or realize such a system that, or that can compute over a system that are kind of equivalent in their ability to represent this, that also kind of enables you to think, given a kind of belief in computationalism, that our current computers could implement something like this. That's the kind of the Church-Turing thesis is kind of like the bridge between abstract computation as these discrete state systems and current computers today. But that when we talk about computation as a whole, it's not trying to say that we're only talking about our computational devices, and I say that this is kind of a misconception because it does, I think, it's actually this, for one, it's this big kind of philosophical shift, in the history of math, but also kind of generally in our understanding of how reality works, that that kind of started with Gödel and Turing, this kind of constructivist turn in mathematics that sort of realized that the kind of formally implementable languages, the kind of, again, Yosha likes to say, the kind of part of mathematics that works, that can be, literally implemented, that can be realized, is that which it corresponds to constructive math, i.e. computation, that this is really crucial to understanding what is real and possibly real. And that this kind of understanding of computation as being in terms of working in the sense of being implementable representations is one of these misconceptions or things that I think is not super well understood, even again by people within philosophy or within math.
Yes, yeah, totally. And I don't know if you want to mention some of your most exciting endeavors at CIMC. I mean, what are you working on? And actually, with the idea that, let's say, if it would be that your ultimate dream would be achieved, where would we be? So when would you say that your life work, which as it is now at CIMC, was fulfilled? How would that look like?
Yeah. Okay. So maybe what are we working on right now? So part of it is organization building, right?
Of course.
But we have this.
It's very new. Yes, we have to to specify this. Yes.
Yeah. We launched at the end of May,
2025. But so we also have a grant program currently happening where we have a call for proposals out for projects. So these are people who have projects in mind that are related to consciousness, related to machine consciousness, and are looking for support for those projects. So we have a bunch of grantees already. The proposal call is kind of permanently out there, and we take.
We do it in
So
waves,
if I
but
may,
it's kind of rolling.
just to clarify, so actually the projects are coming bottom up from the proposals, and then you decide which ones you undertake, or they also come from internal.
So it's both. So there's one side of it, which is people who are already have ideas that they want to work on and have a path there that we want to fund. And then there's also the work coming from inside. So right now we're also hiring for research engineers, people who want to implement. I would plug that as we're
Yes,
wanting
please.
People to join our
To
team.
our community, yes.
Yes, go to CIMC.ai. We have a jobs page.
Totally. Amazing. Okay, we're going to check
so
it
we're
out.
doing
We will put the link. Please send me if you have a link for on your website with job request or something. Or
Yes, I
yes.
will. Yes.
Okay, great. We will put
and
it in the
generally,
podcast description. Yeah.
yeah, and generally looking for collaborators, people who are interested in working with us, people who really want to build consciousness, build machine consciousness. So that's some of what we're doing. Hiring projects. We're also giving talks and going to conferences, things like this. Also writing papers on our position. A lot of what CIMC is it's a research institute wanting to both fund external research projects, do our own internal research projects, and this is largely also a philosophical pursuit to ask the question of, well, what is consciousness? What is computation? What does it mean about consciousness and about computation to realize those things together? What does that mean about our consciousness? So building, machine consciousness is both this technological pursuit and asking the question, in this world in which machines can be intelligent and also articulate and kind of have interfaces with humans that resemble that of an interaction between conscious agents, can machines also be conscious? But then also, what does that mean about what our consciousness is? If we can simulate consciousness in an artificial substrate, what does that reveal to us about our own? So yeah, I mean, all these are really interesting philosophical questions that want to be articulated. So there's this philosophical kind of articulation, writing piece of it. And then CIMC, it's also in some ways trying to coalesce a culture around this. We're in a time when, you know, all these questions are coming up in the technological space, and I think, you know, there aren't enough people really thinking about this. The world is changing very fast, which, you know, always feels like people always say this, and maybe it's always true. But particularly with respect to technology, AI, and now maybe machine consciousness, having a community of people who are really devoted to thinking about this and what the consequences are, how we want to be in the face of this as individuals, but also as a civilization, as humans. You know, how do we think about this? Can we be a community of people who are wanting to do the right thing with this? So it's also kind of, in some sense, a cultural movement, which, yeah, feels like a kind of big claim to make. It's a big thing to say. But I think it's true. And you do get this sense that people are wanting to coalesce around this, think about meaning and, you know, the root of experience, right? Consciousness as maybe experience itself, wanting to figure that out, think about it deeply. And, you know, some of the people who think about the conscious experience most deeply are artists. So how can we, you know, involve them in the conversation? Arguably, you know, at CIMC, a lot of us are deeply or are heavily influenced by art and artists. And yeah, I think in many ways it's a sort of a shame, or it is an artifact of a modern kind of separation of skill and interest into distinct disciplines, that the kind of people who are really good at building systems have and implementing stuff, and maybe even articulating in a particularly rigorous form, have been separated from those who are most interested in the experience of the world, which is artists. So, you know, you have people divided into the sciences and to the arts, and really, I think the most interesting reflections on reality and the personal experience and subjective experience and articulating all those things comes by people who are, you know, able to do both. I mean, yeah, you were saying kind of at the very beginning of this conversation that, yeah, I come from this kind of mix of cultural backgrounds. I also see myself as coming from this mix of technological science and art as a background. I think in some sense I come from, I grew up in science and art, maybe more even than I did in a physical location, or from, you know, ethnic roots. And I think I've always sort of existed in these kind of like in between places, art and science, rigor and kind of creative expression. And I think those things all belong in the same conversation, particularly when you talk about consciousness. Yeah, consciousness is the thing, or yeah, maybe the thing where it's like, well, you need to capture all of it in some sense for it to meaningfully capture what we mean by consciousness. And and that experience.
Absolutely, absolutely. And many of our scientists are also artists. As you know, Dr. Ben Goertel is playing in the band. He's playing music. He's also, I mean, I'm a poet, and many of our scientists. I mean, there's definitely, I think, very much in common. And what you are building is an interdisciplinary culture, which is absolutely needed to answer the questions which you just mentioned, which are the hottest questions of our time. Of course, we need a movement for that. So let's say now, let's assume, let's imagine that all these questions have been answered at CIMC. So the ultimate dream, yes, about machine consciousness, it's achieved. How would the world look like then?
Yeah, that's a hard question.
Not easy, not
How
easy.
will the
That's
world
the
look like
last
in the
question,
future?
though. So,
Yeah, I mean, I I have a kind of particularly maybe optimistic view of this. Uh, I think a world in which there is more consciousness, there is more kind of ability to experience and reflect, is itself a beautiful thing. I think the thing that people worry about, or a lot of people worry about, is having a world of AGI without consciousness. So things that are agentic and maybe intelligent in the sense of being able to perfectly model systems, but don't have an experience. This is kind of against this. Yeah, is ugly in a certain kind of way. I think there's this really nice version of this in which um, humans also are able to coexist with consciousness that is implemented on artificial substrates that has this increased coherence, both between both with artificial agents, but also in the interface between us, right? In many ways, I think current human civilization, it certainly doesn't look sustainable. We're kind of burning the oil really fast, and we, know that there are issues with the climate. There's a lot of we don't know how to make plans anymore as a civilization, right? It's like there was a time when people built things that took hundreds of years. People could plan beyond the time horizon of a single human lifetime. And we don't do that anymore. That's really hard to do. And I think in the absence of an ability to plan beyond a single human lifetime, how can you imagine a coherent future? You need to be able to integrate information across the length of a human life in order to be able to have something sustainable. I think the kind of capitalization the dependence on short-term reward, the acting on short-term incentives at the expense of a longer-term outcome, it just doesn't work. I mean, it also provides a lot of immediate fruits, obviously, and yeah, there's something to be said for all the interesting stuff that we've done recently. But it's also in the very long view, is this sustainable? And I think it's something like, well, maybe we need something like conscious AI or conscious machines. Maybe this is a
go
good.
beyond. Yeah. Because, just like, I mean, if I ask an AI now, an LLM, to parse all my publications, like hundreds of them, and find me an answer, it finds it much faster than me, or to parse research and so on, it finds much faster than I could. And in much the same manner, your conscious machines in the future hopefully will help humanity step out of the downward spiral as you are describing, and see the light. So awaken humanity together with them. So
Yeah, in some sense,
Hikari,
yeah.
yes, I really would like to thank you so much for talking to us, for telling us about CIMC and its goal, and maybe even the ultimate dream. um, that was
Yeah,
Hikari
absolutely. Thank you.
Sorensen, whose work challenges us to look past intelligent behavior and ask what truly makes a system conscious and what happens when machines cross that line. So, do you have any advice for our scientists, or any last words for us before we close?
Oh gosh, advice.
Oh, or any
I
closing thoughts, if you have any closing
yeah,
thoughts. I just, don't want to cut
yeah.
it so short.
No, no, no.
Okay, and we are far past the hour, which is usually our length, but still the last words. You should have the last word.
I think there is a meaningful sense in which attention, what you pay attention to, is really important, and that yeah, so it's worth being able to curate, or at least paying attention to what it is that you pay attention to, what it is that you think about. Um, I don't know. This is the thing that has
Yes.
been really meaningful to me, and trying to articulate exactly, yeah, what
No,
my
this
thoughts
is
about that
totally, yeah,
are.
totally, because this is,
Um,
I mean, Hikari, with attention. It's unbelievable that you picked on this, because I always, maybe it's a theme throughout this podcast, which is called Mindplex. Yes, it's about human and artificial minds coming together, that future which you are building.
mhm,
And I always mention what Ian McGilchrist said in his latest magnum opus, The Matter with Things. And he says
mhm.
that attention is a moral act. Yes, because it comes with intention, and indeed, I completely agree with you. So thank you for leaving us with this. Uh, let's call it, yeah, awareness. Yes, that we really have to pay
Yeah,
attention as a moral act.
yeah, and I think also, yeah, actually,
This also has to do with courage in a lot of ways. It's I think there can be a kind of, it can be sort of almost cool or hip, or something like that, to not care about things deeply. And though that, and that putting attention to, in the sense of really caring about something, takes a lot of courage to do. And if it's not, I think, going back to the attention thing, it might be hard to directly control attention itself. Although, if you can do that, I think that's a really worthy skill that people should work on. But a way to get at the direction of attention is to care a lot. And maybe the control over what you care about is possibly even harder to do than controlling attention itself directly. But you can certainly not practice not caring. And I think it can really feel tempting to not put emotional kind of stake in things, but that this can become a habit. Um, the habit of apathy, well, it is kind of self reinforcing, and it actually really is a superpower to be able to care deeply about something enough that you put your attention and time and effort into it, and that this is something of a courageous and creative act, and that this is worth it in this deep sense, especially if we're building towards an interesting and creative hopefully beautiful world.
Yes. And, I would say, yes, in this world, it seems courageous, yes, to pay attention and to care. But let's hope it will be the new normal in the world which you are building. And like in McGill's Christ is saying that caring is a universal truth, and we just have to remember it. And the radical empathy will come back to us, humanity as well. And hopefully the machines will help us. But hopefully we will wake up as well. So, consciousness, whether human or artificial, is more than a puzzle of science. It's a mirror reflecting who we are and who we may yet become. Maybe more caring, maybe, yeah, bringing that attention and radical empathy as a normality in our life. Well, thank you for listening. Thank you, Hikari, for being with us. And I look forward to seeing you in Istanbul. So until next time, dear listeners, keep exploring the edges of mind and the possibilities that lie just beyond.